Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar titled Local Stakeholders and Necessity-Driven Entrepreneurs, a Missing Link, Solutions for a Stronger Local Entrepreneurial Ecosystem. First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ali Taha. I'm a researcher here at LCPS, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Before introducing our distinguished speakers, I would like to notify you that simultaneous interpretation is available. You can activate it by pressing on the translation button in the bottom of the screen. ألفت انتباهكم بأن استطاعتكم تشغيل خاصية الترجمة الفورية من الإنجليزية إلى العربية من خلال الضغط على الزر المشغل في أسفل الشاشة. Our discussion with the speakers will last for 45 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. Questions can be submitted in written form in the chat box at the bottom right corner of the screen. Unless specified, I will choose the speaker to whom I will address the question. This webinar will be broadcasted live on our Facebook page, and a recorded version will be made available. Today's webinar wouldn't have been possible without the collective effort of our team here at LCPS, so I would like to thank you all. Moreover, I would like to thank our speakers who have been keen on joining for this discussion and sharing their knowledge with the wider public, and whom I'm going to introduce in the alphabetical order. Starting with Ali Saad. Ali is a survey engineer, GIS and information management expert specialized in data collection, analysis, visualization, and mapping. His expertise ranges from working with UN agencies such as UNHCR and UN Habitat in the humanitarian and development domain, to working within the private sector in the oil and gas industry. Throughout his work, Ali aims to create a data and information-driven environment to support planning and decision-making. Since 2019, Ali is the Information Management Officer at the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. Nabir Hassan is a founding partner consultant and the impact and change enabler at Beyond Group. As a consultant and advisor in the development field for over 10 years, Nabil has long worked with governments, public institutions, international organizations, and donors to catalyze multi-stakeholder initiatives for meaningful change at the local and national level. Nabil specializes in governance and public reform, organizational development, and strategic planning. He holds a bachelor's in pharmacy from the Beirut Arab University, a master's in public health promotion and community health from the American University of Beirut, has completed a consulting process course at the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And lastly, last but not least, Lina Maddah. Lina is a senior researcher here at the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies. Her areas of work include local economic development, economic geography, industrial location decisions, firm dynamics, and cultural and creative industries. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Rovira in Virgili, Spain. Before joining LCPS, she worked at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, in Venice, Italy. And she was a visiting researcher at the Regional Applications Laboratory at UIUC, USA, and an economic researcher at the Department of Economics at Spain. So I would like to thank you and welcome you all to today's discussion. And I'll initiate the discussion with Lina Maddah. Lina is going to tell us about local institutions as major actors in supporting necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas. So Lina, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you, Ali, for the introduction. Thanks to our speakers and everyone who helped organize this webinar. So I'm going to start by introducing this topic and addressing the main local institutions that we are going to further discuss in this webinar. So in 2021, the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies conducted a detailed study on necessity entrepreneurs in 3 rural areas in Lebanon, Rashaya, Naidi, and Halab. Findings have revealed the numerous challenges facing NDEs, particularly in light of the multiple crises the country is facing. So NDEs, like any other entrepreneurial ventures, need to be studied in a local context, as local entrepreneurial cultures and local institutions can form the infrastructure to influence growth dynamics and opportunity emerging for NDE. So I will begin this discussion. I can ask my colleague Ali to share the PowerPoint, please. I will begin this discussion by addressing multi-stakeholder rules to tackle the challenges confronting NDEs and the essentials to boost a vibrant local entrepreneurial ecosystem in rural areas. So to start with, just briefly, NDEs are individuals who start micro businesses of economic necessity and to compensate the lack of other job opportunities. So these businesses constitute a large portion of informal employment in Lebanon and struggle with precarious work conditions, especially in rural areas. So our research have revealed that NDEs tend to engage in these kinds of enterprises in times of conflict, economic crisis, or recession, largely due to the absence of job opportunities. So next slide, please, Ali. The next one. Yes, so NDEs largely explain the period of total entrepreneurial activity in rural areas of developing countries like and unfortunately, rural areas are underdeveloped relative to urban ones, which associates with problems of depopulation and stagnation, evident in the lack of physical infrastructure, lack of digital integration in processes, lack of diversification in economic activity, relatively limited entrepreneurship opportunities, absence of collaboration among stakeholders, limited innovative practices, altogether generating poor local economic performance and poor productivity. So also, unfortunately, the rural areas backslide into poverty given the delivery of services to citizens, mainly services related to education and care. So from study on rural areas in Lebanon, several of these criteria can be highlighted. Marginalization has engendered repercussions on migration rates of Lebanese rural youth, high unemployment rates of the remaining residents, and increased poverty in their towns. So despite this stigma on areas, the argument that economic development is strictly urban is a misconception that has been challenged in the past decade. So a new strand of literature policymaking is shedding light on the potential of economic development in rural areas, thus shifting the perception from areas of stagnation to areas of opportunity, where economic resilience can be fostered through a development paradigm shift. So talking about rural areas in Lebanon, they are generally low density economies characterized by small local workforce, limits the number and size of firms can efficiently operate. There's a high transportation cost and lower economies of scale, which increases the cost of this provision. There's a difficulty in attracting and retaining professionals. Also, there is a possibility of strong competition among rural regions that have similar economic structures. And these local rural economies are also very sensitive to national business cycle. So understanding the growth dynamics of such areas in Lebanon is essential to create favorable environments under which rural communities can attract entrepreneurs and capital inflows, can become more competitive, can establish high levels of worker productivity, create more opportunities which enhance the local residents' quality of life. So now looking at how local institutions can play a role and help. Next slide, please. So the first local actors I'm going to briefly highlight are educational institutions, universities, local technical schools, schools providing vocational training to which the capacity and skills of laborers can be built and developed. Also, links between rural and urban educational institutions in Lebanon can be useful for bringing technical expertise to rural areas Also, establishing direct relationships with universities and NDEs forms a basis for economic development in rural areas, as sometimes these entrepreneurs lack the skills or needed to develop innovative solutions for their daily problems and their businesses. So the second of institutions are interrelated. These are business incubators, networking institutions, NGOs, financial institutions. I'll keep this section to be later discussed by Mr. Nabir Hassan. And finally, I would like to highlight the main actors who are local government and policymakers, who are the major players supporting the rural communities through up approach that can reduce the time and cost for the private sector to formalize their business, to have better access to resources, among other things. So in Lebanon, the government support is essential in order to avoid the widespread social and economic distress in rural areas and reduce the tension in the labor market between the foreign and the local laborers, mainly in informal jobs in Lebanon. So if you can move to the next, please, Ali. So as the crisis generally deal already existing economic and social asymmetries in countries, and Lebanon is no exception today. So the disparities among regions, the structural weaknesses within each region cause the entrepreneurs to be hit the hardest in time of the crisis. Low density economies and the entities operating in them are challenged today more than ever. Still, they can offer opportunities which can contribute to the survival of rural areas and facilitate the inflow of productive human resources who are moving back from cities to their villages. So only with development strategies that support local entrepreneurs, their ecosystem, institutions, and will territories be able to generate the economic activity required for recovery and sustainable development. Here we can highlight the role of government, because citizens' willingness to incur risks associated with investing, with launching businesses, with their NDEs, is directly tied to their trust in the government efficacy and performance. Also, policy local level to target NDEs shall consider the space paradigm, where it's essential to differentiate between two categories of rural areas in Lebanon in which NDEs operate: the peripheries, urban parts of the country, and the completely remote villages. So the spatial geographic analysis takes into consideration different needs, the very basic characteristics, the economic factors, the human capital, and the changing graphics of different municipalities and sizes of and geographies of municipalities. So this is it for me. So an effective local entrepreneurial ecosystem shall be based on supporting rural diversification, the construction of market-oriented institutions, strengthening the social capital that's favorable for NDEs, also considering future shifts toward innovative sectors like the knowledge economy, diversifying, developing new economic activities where there would be potential rural demand, all together in order to establish and expand the business activities and to shift from need-based entrepreneurs to opportunity-based entrepreneurs. And this can only be when we identify the change factors and the place-based characteristics of municipalities and rural areas to be able to design targeted policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm moving now to Nabir Hassan. So Nabir, how do you think we can better engage the private sector in local policy-making decisions? And what's the role of business incubator networking institutions? Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, and hello everyone, and thank you for LCPS organizing and other timely and needed research all the time. To answer the question quickly, I'll start from a wonderful introduction on the general context, and I think it's safe to say that it's the scope and size challenges are too big for SMEs, NDEs, to handle on their own. There's a need for local level collaboration. There's a need for engagement of various stakeholders at the local level, from municipalities to other local stakeholders. I mean, a deeper look to to who are those NDEs and what topics, how do they use their topics, how do they choose their sectors, is that they follow a trend, right? And mainly, who sets that trend? With the absence of a national strategy, local level strategies and local level coordination becomes the key gap. And that's where the roles of municipal, private sector, academia, incubators, and others at the local level come in to develop that local level strategy to really fill the gap. It's not there by national strategy, by the current challenges that are there. I'll go deeper and talk a bit more specifically about the role of private sector. And the question that you posed, Ali, specifically incubators and network agencies. So to be able to do that, I'll start with diagnosing the problem, and Lina did a good job some of the challenges, but allow me to use some medical terminology to go back to my medical background to diagnose a problem. So I'll use COVID since it's on our heads and minds all the time now, hopefully not on our throats. But basically, I'll start by COVID by saying C, which is basically and diagnosing the key challenges NDE face and local economic cycles face, so that I can discuss based on that how can incubators and working agencies and private sector contribute to the solution. So starting with the C, one key challenge is concentration of services and funds, right? By concentration of services and funds, we're talking about geographic concentration, specifically between big municipalities, between economic centers versus rural areas, and even concentration of the same key players. So to events where we see the same key players supported by various entities, while others are left out. So there's a major challenge in that. Move into O, and with the O, I'll talk about opportunity. So how do we identify sectors? How do we decide, specifically NDEs, how do they decide what sector to work on without market research? There's a big challenge in avoiding repetition, avoiding investing in the wrong place. And I always give the example of my own village where we had 14 bakeries doing the same type of typical Lebanese manouche, and then with one bakery coming out to do a rather different, slightly, I would say, which is basically sage and choufen and whatever, like dominating the market, because we had 14 repetitive edits. So who orient basically to identifying the right opportunity. That's one major sector challenge. Move to V and venue, and by venue here, I mean the direct venue, so the space for work, the space for actual production, and the space for connecting and collaborating and meeting others, etc. The challenge on that as well. I and innovation, and with innovation, I gave the example directly from the village, but that's one example of many where there isn't there's a lack in new innovative tools and approach to really meet market demands and to really create needed products. And D, to conclude, is a duplication of services, whether we're talking about funds, service provided, or products being really delivered to the market and produced. So that's a very brief summary of what challenges we're facing. And if there's the challenge, we all know that a PCR screening helps. And when I talk about PCR, just to share a bit the role of incubators and networking agencies, P is basically to package a set of services and help them develop the products, help them meet standards, help them really have a better offer, basically. The C is the connect, basically. So how to incubators and networks can help connect the various NDEs together, but also connect them with the right entities. And this is technical support or financial support, and this is what they are, which is receiving funds and support. So PCR just does the diagnosis, right? So we'll move into the actual, to addressing the real issue, which happens through a vaccine. And the vaccine would allow us to really discuss specifically the role of the incubators and the networking agencies. So starting with the V, I'll go for venue. And with venue, specifically with the higher production costs now, with the higher transportation costs, there's a need for manufacturing, for manufacturing hubs, for hosting NDE, really get them together and connecting them in place. And that's a major role that incubators can play. A is, and basically here we're talking access to funds, access to markets, access to technical support, access to business support organizations. So providing access is another role that networks can contribute to. I'll use the first C of vaccine to talk about contextualization. So the strength of local entrepreneurs is basically the context, right? So to keeping authenticity, making sure that they're producing the right content, specifically rural areas and NDEs. So that's a major role that business support entities like incubators can play. The other C is basically for completing missing links, and here we're talking about missing links to data, to strategy, to export, to funds, to buyers, to market, etc. So there's a lot of missing links that are really challenging local entrepreneurs to really be able to grow. And here is this is a typical role that the private sector can play to solve, or networks can play to solve. Moving on to the I, and I'll focus on inclusion. So promoting equal access and avoiding centralization in specific regions, avoiding also lack of access, by gender, by so youth versus others, disabled groups who have harder access. So making sure that economic side is really, and economic opportunity is really inclusive to various actors. The I can be innovation, and can also mention before. Incubators can foster innovation, an enabler for fostering innovation and supporting new ideas, new approaches, bringing on new tools to help them grow. For the N, here again, the networking, and mentioned before, it's a major challenge. So networking between themselves to learn, to collaborate, to connect, to solve common challenges, and to grow. And the E being environmental sustainability. So adding and mainstreaming this component so that NDEs maintain this rural aspect and this do not harm the environment while they're actually growing their entrepreneurs, their business, their SMEs, and their sources of income. So just use those terms to try to highlight how can really private sector, specifically incubators and networking agencies, foster the growth of NDEs. And I'll just conclude by providing a few examples so that we're not really, talking in vain and broadly. One is directly from yesterday, and it kept coming to my mind while I was, thinking of today's session. I passed by a small farmers market in organized weekly. Yesterday was the opening at Mir Amin Palace in Shuf, and I'm giving the example to share that there is. It's organized by the Culinary Passport, which is a private sector entity working in Lebanon and France on culinary support and etc. It's hosted by Mir Amin, which is a private sector hotel. So they provided the venue, they provided the marketing, the branding, the momentum, if you like, because it's being hosted at that venue. It's organized by Shuf Biosphere Reserve, which is the NGO, which is have some programs where they play some more or less the role of an incubator, or more accurately a connector in the networking entity to connect those local NDEs to others. So what I've seen there is that you had tens of small entrepreneurs who have mostly been supported through incubators and through networks and through economic support programs to really grow their into real products through branding, through working on the full value chain. So they went to local farmers, they helped them connect with, how are they doing their actual produce, and figured out where are the gaps in the value chain so that they can grow and export and others. So look at those who were there, and you can easily spot who has been supported by, by local and incubators and others who really has not. And it's somehow sad, right? Not always positive to see that it's like you can easily spot the difference. They cannot compete, and thus the need for really those incubators and others to really be as inclusive and as engaging for others. A quick example got to my attention when Rina mentioned the universities and vocational schools as well. One of the products we worked on at Beyond was the Mashghal app, which is basically an app which connects vocational schools and universities to private sector. And this is specifically to fill the education gap and the market gap. So first time, employees would really, companies would reflect back to universities and to vocational schools, what are the gaps in the education and the readiness of the fresh graduates that they just employed, so that the curricula can be, developed. And this is a typical, engagement role for private sector in supporting, the economic cycle in the region. The third example is Batloon municipality. I'm a member of the board of the municipal board in Batloon, and basically we did a full study, full research on, we set the strategy, right? So going back to the role of local stakeholders, we did a full study on the needs of, the possibility and the potential for ecotourism, and we set the vision of the village. So we developed the strategic plan, what's needed, and we positioned the village as a hub for ecotourism, tourism, etc. And we set the plan, but without the support of support entities, the ideas are still there without being, picked up and supported. So the need for all the players to really come together, build on what they're doing, capitalize, and really create this momentum so the wheels can get moving together. So to conclude, without the rest of the exam, another Kura Innovation Hub, where we did a feasibility study for the Union of Municipalities of Kura. How can we get academia, so University of Lebanon over there, with Union of Municipalities, with private sector, with the civil society entities, to really identify what are the gaps in the region, what are the opportunities in the region, and then how can we create a space where innovation is fostered to really solve economic challenges and advance more and local SMEs in the region. So many examples that show how only through the collaboration of local stakeholders together, including private sector, including incubators and support entities and other, in various hats, right? So for understanding markets, for providing venues, for being an advisory member on boards of those small entities and others, providing funding, the typical role maybe for private sector, being technical partners, etc. Engaging to really create those synergies and identify the synergies where private sector can be involved is key for solving the challenges faced by NDEs in the regions. That's it for now, and we can continue perhaps later in the discussion.
Sure thing. Thanks a lot, Nabil. So I'm going to be moving now to Ali Saad, but before I do that, I want to remind our audience that they can write down their questions in the chat box. We're going to get there in the final section of this webinar and the Q&A. But I would just encourage you to be writing your questions down. So Ali, hello. Can you hear me? Okay, that's really good. I would encourage if you can open your cam just for a better interaction. Otherwise, it's fine.
Can't you see me?
We can't hear you properly, Ali. I'm not sure if you're using a microphone or.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Ali, we can see Ali's.
Oh, sure. But as Ali, because I cannot hear Ali well, I'm not sure if you guys can hear him.
No, we cannot hear him well. We can see you, Ali Saad, but we cannot hear you well.
So maybe Ali, you have to take your headset off. I think maybe that would be the solution.
Okay, let me try something.
Still, It's really like you're really
Distant.
far. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, can you hear me now better?
Nope.
No?
Still.
Okay.
Anna, I would encourage you to try removing the headset because it might be an issue with the microphone.
Yeah, I will try. Okay, can you hear me now?
It's a bit better, I assume.
Can you hear me now?
So if anything, I'm gonna ask you the question, and then we're gonna see if it works with the volume. So Ali, when it comes to information-driven decision making, how can local policymakers benefit from digital solutions? The floor is yours, Ali. If the sound is still far,
I'll raise my voice. I'll try to raise my voice as much as I can.
it's really, really far. I'm not sure if raising your
Okay,
voice is going to be solving the problem.
Okay. I don't know what might be the solution. The headset completely.
That's perfect.
Okay, this is
Yeah,
better.
yes.
Okay.
Hello, Ali.
Okay, so introduction. Thanks for the invite. It's
Welcome.
here. So today I will talk about information-driven decision making and how can digital solutions help policymakers in taking better decisions. So while preparing for the session, I found that the term information-driven decision making is rarely used. And the more used term is data-driven decision-making, which made me think that it might be of value to distinguish between the two terms before entering into the actual subject. So to start with, data is actually a collection of facts. It can come in the form of text, observation, figures, images, numbers, etc. But on its own, data doesn't carry any significance or purpose. On the other hand, information is knowledge gained through study and research. So essentially, it is the result of analyzing and interpreting pieces of data. So in other words, if data is individual facts, then information is the organization and interpretation of those facts. So to make decisions, our objective when working with data should be moving from the point where we are producing statistics to where we can tell a story and form an understanding. This is something that you can see, for example, in the VASIR report, which is the Vulnerability Assessment of Syrian Refugees in Lebanon. So in addition to presenting statistics and figures in the report tells the story of refugees in Lebanon. Now that we know what information is, we can say that information-driven decision-making is simply decisions that are taken based on insights, on relative understanding of reality. So, on contrary to information decision-making or informed decision-making, is uninformed decision-making. And these are decisions that are based on perceptions, on intuition, on guesswork, on imagined solutions, on imported solutions, I can say. Imported solutions meaning I'm applying a solution to work somewhere else to my problem without taking any consideration for local context or local variables. So the value in choosing informed decision-making is that it helps in removing ambiguity and reduce uncertainty. In addition, that it supports our decision with evidence. Okay, so but to reach informed decisions, we need nowadays the help of digital solutions. So it's not, so the way to reach informed decisions, we need the help of tools that are offered by digital solutions. Which brings us to the main question of how can local policy makers benefit from digital solutions? So first, let's start with what makes a good policy in general. So simply put, policy, and a good policy, to say, is an intervention that achieves the outcome it intends at acceptable cost, manageable consequences, and a way that proves politically sustainable. So some policies suffer when there is change on the political level. Okay, are 7 main, if you want, activities that digital solutions can support policymakers in reaching a good policy, which is based on informed decisions. By the way, I found the term digital solutions a very broad term. So the easiest way to think about it is that it's anything that helps you do something through a screen. Okay, so the simplest way to put it, a screen, a phone screen, a tablet, or a computer. Okay. So to continue, the first activity that I found digital solutions can support policymakers in is finding the right people, finding the experts. Okay, so today it's very easy to find experts on any subject, and local policymakers doesn't have to rely on internal expertise, for example, in their municipalities, in their union of municipalities, or even at the higher level at the ministry. Okay, there are a lot of researchers and experts that publishes their work online, and many of us are here in the webinar, and they are easily found, and we can take advantages of platforms that are dedicated for professional profiles like LinkedIn, for example. The second activity the second activity that supports policymakers is accessing existing data. Okay, so accessing existing data doesn't just mean researching online for publications, although there is a huge benefit in that. But there is also a lot of raw data and open source data that are available online. And if it's not public, it can be easily requested or purchased. For example, the best place for accessing existing data in Lebanon, humanitarian data, if you want, is the Lebanon Information Hub. I can share the link if you want in the chat. So the third activity that digital solutions offer policymakers, offer support for policymakers, is in collecting new data. Okay, so from here onwards, there is this is where the digital solutions really shows its strength. So new data is collected all the time anyway. Our smartphones are constant data collectors. Professionally speaking, in our domain, apps that are developed for digital forms, like form apps, like Microsoft Forms or Google Forms, can be easily used for data collection. But the more advanced ones, for example, form app, Kobo, Survey 123, which we can really build complex forms that hosts photos, coordinates, files, audio files. There are also apps that are map-based, like Collector for ArcGIS, which combines the mapping interface with data entry forms. So it gives you the benefit of both. The fourth activity we can talk about is data management. So the process of data management involves cleaning, storing, merging, and retrieving data. However, it's a primary or secondary data. So, okay, we can categorize it into two, which is non-tabular and tabular data. So non-tabular data is just a word, a term to describe our documents, our pictures, our PDFs, our audio files, our video files. And these are more complex to deal with because they are stored in a tree or folder, okay, in a tree of folders. Although still much better than searching in a closet. But I'm talking about more complex to retrieve the data and look into it. On the other hand, you have tabular data. They are stored in spreadsheet applications like Excel, Google Sheets, or in database applications like, for example, Microsoft SQL Server for Postgres, or even more advanced solutions like Azure or Google Cloud Services. We usually choose between spreadsheets and databases depending on the data size, its functionality, and the security level we want. So the fifth activity that we will talk about is data analysis. As you know, there are a lot of tools for data analysis nowadays. You can do a lot with Excel only if you're really good. But in the past years, BI softwares like Power BI and Tableau are becoming the standard for the industry. BI stands for business intelligence softwares. For more statistical analysis type of analysis, some people use SPSS, some people use R, some people use Python. Mainly R is a dedicated language for statistical analysis, and Python is primarily a programming language, but it's widely used now in data analysis because of its data analysis libraries. The final activity that the digital solutions can support decision makers, and I think it's important, is sharing and collecting feedback. So sharing and collecting feedback is part of involving the community in policy making. Okay, so which is very important, and this can be simply done through social media platforms. And when it's done correctly, it can significantly boost the policy acceptance among people because they are involved in the development of this. Okay, to end the talk, I want to say something that the important part of policy making and informed decision making is the last part of the sentence, which is the decision making by itself. Okay, so if there is no decision making, there is no benefit in discussing tools to improve decision making. Okay, I will stop here because from here onwards, I think it's political. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. And yes, I do agree with you. The political will is like a precondition, is a prerequisite for good policies. You would have to have decision makers who are basically willing to engage in decision making and not be just passive observers of events. So we have no questions remaining. Okay, so I would please urge you to write down your questions. We're not going to take any questions verbally, or so if there's a possibility, because I have here Hamza Abeid. You can write your questions in either in both Arabic or English. There's no problem in that. So waiting for Hamza to write his question. I have a question for you, Ali. Your opinion, what's your assessment of our use of digital solutions here in Lebanon? To what extent are decision makers resorting to these digital tools to better inform their decision making, whether in data collection or analyzing the data? How much is this culture present in Lebanon, whether on the at the central level or at the local level?
Okay, so if I'm gonna talk about the local level, the municipality level, I can say that there is a huge variation between the different municipalities depending on their capacity. Okay, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, you're.
Yes. So I can say that there is a huge variation between municipalities depending on their capacity. So more rural municipalities suffer more in these areas than more of the urban municipalities, which might have more resources. You can find some outliers in municipalities if some municipality managed to get some support from an organization somehow. And since they're bringing up an organization for funding, so these organizations actually ask the municipalities to follow certain standards. Okay, so in terms of the local, there is this a huge variation. So small municipalities, you don't have that suffering from funding shortages and stuff like that. It's kind of negligible, the whole digital solutions thing. On the, if you want, on the national level, on the level of ministries, there are some actually important efforts, and when there are serious projects, there is this type of there is this level of work, like at the professional level, because sometimes they outsource projects to companies which have a high level of professionalism and stuff like that. But yes, there is this huge gap. Again, I ended my talk by saying it's not how we improve it, it's the decision itself. So I know about a lot of policies, like in Lebanon now, the current crisis, you can see there is a huge housing crisis, for example. Although someone might think that there is no housing policy, but there is. It's just there is no decision to go with it. Okay.
Yes, indeed, enforcement is essential. So we have a question here by Ailina Slevova, and pardon me if I'm mispronouncing the name. So Ailina is asking Nabil. She says incubators currently rely on donor funding to support entrepreneurs. As such, they need to make the case of supporting businesses that have the potential to benefit larger number of people in need. How can incubators make a better case for supporting NDEs to donors given their micro scale?
Excellent question. I think that's one key challenge, and that's what we mean by one of the challenges being the concentration of funds to those who are more ready. And because many donors come and want quick results and quick wins, they end up reaching the same ready stakeholders and thus fund them over and over again while others are left out. So a quick answer is, first of all, there needs to be a full revamp of how incubators as well get their own funds, and counting on donors alone would make them always stuck into that cycle. So there can be several revenue streams for incubators if they are really well connected to the local stakeholders. And here is where, again, we go back to this local connection. A lot of costs can be saved if a local incubator is connected to, let's say, a local university as a service provider, connected to the municipality, who can really save a lot of costs that usually incubators put, including space and others and connections, etc., market research, etc., etc. So definitely one solution is changing the whole business model of how incubators are operating, and thus getting into the cycle of the need to support only winning and guaranteed projects. The second is specifically addressing more non-traditional, as in more rural and more non-traditional, I think is the best term, actors, by really reaching out to them. And this as well can happen through local municipalities, local NGOs, so the local cooperative in the village, the local women association in a specific village, etc., who are the real local stakeholders who usually do not have access and who usually can provide those links to the NDEs and make sure that they're not fixed on one specific set of beneficiaries. Ali, if you allow me just to build a bit on what Ali, Saad, and you were talking about, specifically the digital tools and the use of data, linking it more to what we were talking about. One example is Mashghal, the app I mentioned, which is basically turns data into a policy influence on the curricula, at least of universities. Another is Scene, which is the social entrepreneurship network, which is a platform that will be launched soon, and which really is a whole digital platform that connects all different stakeholders in the social entrepreneurship ecosystem. And this includes business support entities, social enterprises, private sector, incubators, et cetera, et cetera. And there are many, not to take a lot of time now, but there are many services that the platform provides, which really allow it to really utilize the data in a way that can serve policy, that can serve, solve challenges, et cetera, just to capitalize on what has been said before. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nabil. So Hamza was actually asking you, Ali, if you could repeat the 7 steps, but because we have many questions to address, basically, if you have them in written form, is it possible to put them in the chat box, if that's the case?
Yeah, I can.
That would be perfect. That would save us some time. And so in this case, I'm gonna move to Lina, and we have a question by Sabrina. And she's asking, in the 3 areas covered in the study, how would you assess the role of the existing cooperatives?
Okay, so to go back to the study that we have conducted, well, there was a variation. First of all, we were surprised at first to find out that for example, one of the biggest agricultural areas in Lebanon, which is Fnaidik, there's no farmers cooperative for example, the apple farmers in specific, for instance, because they are, this region specializes in the crops of agriculture. So we were surprised not to find a well-established, formalized cooperative which is specialized in this type of crops, for example. We found in, for example, Rashaya, there was an environmental cooperative. Also in Jazeen, there was cooperatives in the agricultural sector. There were cooperatives in the crafts and creative industries. But so there's a variation in the cooperatives. And for this reason, we have conducted 2 podcasts. One podcast was, we hosted at LCPS one podcast with the FAO on the establishment of cooperatives and how can local governments and also NDEs themselves and farmers themselves, entrepreneurs themselves, benefit from establishing cooperatives which help them in many aspects related to their businesses. So I can say that the role of existing cooperatives is still modest. However, there are few well-established, like for example, a woman cooperative in Jabal al-Sheikh, which is in Rashaya and the surrounding municipalities, which involves 150 women working in the agriculture. And this is one of the successful case studies. So the role is still generally modest with few very successful case studies. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Lina. And Hamza is also asking where, if they can have access to the study. I would encourage everyone to go to our website, to our LCPS website, and under the economy section, you would find all Lina's publications resulting or culminating out of this research project. So thank you, Lina.
Yeah. Just one remark, Ali. So we have 3 reports on NDEs, which have specific and detailed sectoral analysis for each of the areas, one on FNAIDIC, one on Hidab, and one on Rashaya. And then we have a policy brief which concludes on all these reports. So all are available at our website, as Ali mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina. Just let me check. Okay, I'm gonna take Hala's question, and this is gonna be maybe our last question for today's session. So Hala says the Ministry of Agriculture is interested in contributing in the field of rural entrepreneurship recently. How can we contribute to improve the ecosystem of entrepreneurship? And this, she has not specified the speaker, so allow me to choose. Let's start with Nabil, and then if Ali or Lina, if you have anything to comment on this, you could go ahead. So Nabil, if you would like to answer Hala. So I think Nabil is having some connection issues. I would, hello Nabil. Were you able to hear?
Can you hear me now? Yes, sorry, راحت الكهرباء الساعة 4. Yes, it's an excellent question, and I think simply because the ministry can do a lot. I think I started by saying that one key challenge is the absence of the national strategies, which really make connecting on the local level a necessity. Perhaps a more accurate term is the lack of implementation of some of the existing strategies and the absence of others. And here is where the ministry can be a major stakeholder in any of those local networks where, for example, I mentioned the issue of orientation, like what sectors to go to. المراكز الإرشاد الزراعي, for example, can be a good partner for really orienting farmers to types of crops, to types of produce, etc. The ministry is an excellent partner for many of the funds related to agricultural, to food processing and development of new products, etc. And here, setting up a clear strategy where access is ensured to different stakeholders, as compared to some of the other funds who really usually go to some of the specific stakeholders, as we were mentioning before. So concentration of funds. The ministry can play that role of really dispersing and distributing, etc. Third aspect, I know cooperatives is a major issue. They're under Ministry of Labor, right? They're not under Ministry of Agriculture, so that's a major as well challenge. Actually, no, they are under Ministry of Agriculture, which is if you can correct me somehow by typing or so. But and enforcing cooperatives is a major role that the ministry can play, whether it's under the direct jurisdiction or not. So this can be as well a third contribution. And the fourth is basically playing the role of through a research center or through really providing information about the markets, about the possibilities that are there is a major role that as well a central ministry can play and contribute to. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nabil. If Ali or Lina would like to add anything to this idea.
I can add that it's essential that the Ministry of Agriculture play a role in creating awareness among farmers and educating them and engaging them in the agri-food businesses, because they are a big part of the value chain of this industry, where there are a lot of opportunities for farmers. So it is interesting to get, for example, apple farmers in Fnaidik engaged with agro-food businesses south of Lebanon or in Bekaa or in other parts. So this matching, I think it's essential that the Ministry of Agriculture hold a role in this. In addition to, of course, where possible, the financial support, like the voucher scheme, which is now being processed by the FAO through the Ministry of Agriculture, remains an urgent need for farmers in the short term. Thanks.
Thank you. And just before concluding, Nabil, you were wondering whether the General Directorate of Cooperatives, if it belongs to the Ministry of Labor or the Ministry of Agriculture. It belongs, it's part of the Ministry of Agriculture, just to...
ما بعرف true ما بعرف كيف راح بالي. Thanks.
So I'm going to conclude. I'm going to thank all our speakers. You've been, the discussion was really insightful, really interesting throughout the session. And I'm also going to thank our audience for staying with us. And I'm going to thank the LCPS team. And finally, I'm going to thank Rana, the interpreter. So I'm going to wish you a good end of the day and also a good weekend. Take care, everyone.